So where have all the big names gone? Why don't we get comics from John Byrne, Walt Simonson, Dave Gibbons anymore? I got this question from a listener, and it's a good one. And it's one that if you collect comics for any length of time, you do start to wonder, where are all the classic creators, particularly ones from the 70s and 80s? They're still alive. Why aren't we getting comics from them? Hey everybody, this is Perch. This was a great question I got from a listener, Bombos, who sent me a few questions. This is the last of them, but I love these questions, and it's all clearly an example of how I need to go through my mail more often and actually read things and get caught up, because there's wonderful questions out there. And this is a good one. And it's basically one that's been asked, I think, a few times in a few different places. And it's, where have all the big names gone? Why don't we get comics from John Byrne, Walt Simonson, Dave Gibbons, etc. anymore? In other media, established creators keep creating, like Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Stephen King, J.K. Rowling. In European comics, Jean Van Ham has certainly continued to create. Why, particularly in the West, in the US, why do we lose all that experience and knowledge? I don't believe it's because these comic creators have too much money to bother. It's definitely not that reason. That would mean Spielberg, King, etc. are working because they need the cash, which they obviously don't. So, I mean, the first very quick answer to put out there is it's definitely not a money issue, or at least not from the creator's standpoint. A lot of these creators would be more than happy to keep doing work, although it is true that at some point, a lot of creators lose interest in doing kind of monthly comics. But you might argue, hey, given that we're shifting to more OGNs and kind of more limited titles and how those are coming out, this should play very well into a John Byrne or a Walt Simonson or somebody like that. And the answer, by the way, if you might have missed it, is Walt Simonson is doing work. He pops up every now and again for one of the big two, doing a fill-in issue or something small. But more impressively, he did this book Ragnarok here in the last 10 years. That's really cool. It's basically like picture Simonson doing Thor again, but not for Marvel, just a different, Midgar serpent battling Asgardian type comic. It's some really cool stuff. So definitely check that out. But there is a money factor from the other direction. In general, these creators are big names and they expect a certain pay rate. And in a lot of cases, the comic publishers don't want to pay it. Particularly Marvel and DC are more geared toward both a volume play, particularly with Marvel, and also there's a certain, I think, false knowledge. I don't know if that's the right word. There's a belief within those companies that old styles don't sell. And what's funny is a lot of people will deny it, but then when you press, it turns out it's very much the case. There's a belief that old styles do not actually sell. And so therefore, why would you spend premium dollar using a quote unquote old style? Recently, Brett Booth returned to do some issues of the X-Men, and I think anybody who's seen Booth's sketches of kind of X-Men and X-Men characters could say, it's a very dynamic style. It looks like he was born to really draw those characters. But there's a belief within the X office, or there had been, that his style was too 90s, too dated. It didn't really fit what they were currently doing with the titles. And eventually just, I think, good common sense came into people and they realized, hey, here's somebody who's drawing these characters in a really iconic, incredible way. We'd be crazy not to have him do some comics under this line. I think that reason is a pretty crappy one, that people, that these styles are too dated. The reality is if John Byrne showed up and, say, went on to the Avengers and did a long run on the Avengers with the Fantastic Four, nobody, that's going to look great. Byrne's style certainly doesn't fit a lot of what they currently do today, but that doesn't mean his style is wrong. Maybe it means that some of what they're doing today is wrong, bluntly. Not maybe anything about it. There's people who certainly love comics as they are right now, but there is a certain, comics for a long time have drifted along this everybody kind of copy and art style. Back in the 70s and 80s, and it's one of the reasons why I really like that era of comics, is that you had, in my opinion, a lot more different art, a lot of different kind of takes on the titles. And when we got into the 90s, one of the reasons why I'm not as fond of the 90s is everyone started to really copy that extreme kind of Marvel artist style. You had a lot of people trying to draw either like Rob Liefeld or Jim Lee. And I like Rob Liefeld. I like Jim Lee, as I think their styles are unique to them, and I like that they're there. I don't want to see everybody else trying to mimic that style. There was a lot of that back then. And so, and I think since the 90s, you've seen kind of a lot of trends with art. You see a lot of people kind of copying stuff. And I don't know, I see a lot less uniqueness to art. Are there exceptions to that? You bet. And definitely a book like, I don't know, something like Pepe Larraz is going to look far different from something Erica Henderson is doing. They have completely different art styles. So I'm not saying everything is the same, but I'm saying there's a little bit less diversity in terms of the different art styles that we get. And I think that's something that could cut every single way. I think comics are big enough that you could get more of that art style. But the question was, where are the big names gone? So in some cases, there's definitely a cost issue. There's also this perception that their art is just dated and we can't use it, can't go for it, which I think is a very inaccurate, bad assumption that's being made there. The other factor, though, is in some cases, some of these creators are seen as being aligned to kind of rivals, or let's see, I mean, we'll put it in a Cobra Kai perspective. It's like you've got Miyagi-Do has taken over Marvel, and they really don't want any of the Cobra Kai kids to come in and play. And even if there's a perception at one point you were a friend with somebody from Cobra Kai, you don't want them in your house. And so you have karate fights breaking out all the time at the cons. No, I'll stop the analogy there. No, but it's a guy like John Byrne. First off, he's definitely had a reputation for burning bridges with people, and I think we've talked on this channel before about the guy's been a bit of a nut at different times, burning effigies and blowing up the hometowns of publishers he didn't like in the pages of comics. But he's also an incredible talent, and you'd expect at some point people are able to think about business first and not cliques and networks and kind of personal feuds. But it is what it is. Unfortunately, I think comics is too small as a business and financially for good common sense to come to play, and so you do get a lot of really personal preferences, and you get a lot of biases that happen there. And a lot of the older creators, for better or worse, for worse, they got where they got because they were friends with some of the editors and some of the people within comics who are now gone or on the outs. And so as this new group has come in and taken editorial control, they don't want any of that quote unquote old guard to come back in because they were from a rival karate dojo. That's basically, that all sounds ridiculous saying it out loud. That's the reason why I use the Cobra Kai analogy there, is because it is ridiculous. You would hope that just business would be business, but because we've had now multiple decades of comics being a very network driven, it's not what you can do, it's who kind of business in some cases. It's now infected big parts of all of comics. You have a lot of people who just won't work with others because there's this perception that they're in the wrong crew or the wrong clique, or they said the wrong thing at one time, and it's created this mess. But bluntly, if there was one surefire way to kind of put Marvel on really stable, strong ground, or DC or whatever else, it would be to find a healthy mix between new creators who are doing great work and certainly establishing what they can do, and old creators, and having them gonna get on some of these classic titles and do original stories. That would be smart. I think that you should have a balance. And this isn't dragging comics back to the old, nor is it, only doing the new. It should be that, we're giving a little bit of everything. I really hate the attitude and the belief, and this is one of those kind of things that I really stand pretty firm on. I hate this perception of you can't, you have to burn the past. You can't be, we can't, anytime you bring up something from the past that it was new and interesting and exciting, we've got to burn it down because we don't want to be linked back to the past. I think that's insane talk. I think that you can absolutely grow a business and franchise in comics and still respect what came before. And I think that really what comes down to a lot of the big names. They're still out there. Many of them would be more than happy to do work. They're just not being called. And in some cases, they do commissions, and they've kind of worked into that thread. But if you pay John Byrne good money to come in and do a Fantastic Four, 12 issue series, yeah, that's going to do really, really well. And they'd be crazy, frankly, not to. But what do you think? Do you think there's still room for these old names? They should get back out there, or are you glad to see them gone? And who are some of these big names you'd love to see return to comics? Leave a comment below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. Thank you very much, Bambos, for the question, and thanks for listening.